rank of the state of the U.S. economy. And welcome Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's president of the American Action Forum and former director of the Congressional Budget Office. So, Douglas, it's always great to have you with us. Let's start with the jobless claims numbers we got in today. They dipped below 400,000 for last week for the first time since the pandemic. What is the state of the labor economy right now as we look forward to jobs numbers tomorrow?
I think we're steadily improving. I don't think we've seen the dramatic V-shape that everyone had kind of hoped for when the vaccinations became widespread and the sort of pandemic looked to start to be in the rearview mirror. We've been averaging a bit over 500,000 a month. I think we'll see 700,000 additional jobs next month. But the real thing to look for tomorrow is, do we see increased labor force participation? We're still well below where we were prior to the pandemic, and about 4 million people still waiting to come back into the labor force. And the other thing to keep an eye on is just, how much pressure is there on employers? Last month, if you looked at the combination of employees, wages per hour, and hours per week, payrolls were growing at an annual rate of 11%. That's a pretty hot labor market. That's worth seeing if that persists.
So Douglas, one of the things is how do we get people back to work? Because there's a lot of people that don't have jobs ahead of them before. At the same time, it's not for lack of job openings. We have President Biden saying we really need to enact that infrastructure package because it's going to create millions of jobs. I'm not sure we're short on job openings.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the problem either. We've seen a record high number of quits. So we've seen people decide, no, this job's not for me. And the more that we're getting reallocation of jobs at the same time we're trying to get people back to work, the slower this process will be. If you get disgruntled with your current job and decide to look for something else, usually it takes a little while to find the right employer, find the right sort of projects, and where do you want to fit in. And those two things are going on simultaneously. And the more we see people quitting and looking for new opportunities, the slower we'll get back to full employment.
So, Doug, one of the questions is this infrastructure plan and what it would do to the economy. I mean, you're not with the CBO anymore, but if you could sort of do a rough scoring of this, what if, in fact, the president got everything he wanted? What it would likely do both to GDP growth and also, for that matter, to jobs?
Well, let's look at first what they have on the table in the Senate, because that's cleaner. There are no tax increases. There's just infrastructure. It's about $600 billion of new money. So imagine overnight, David, that you put that $600 billion into the economy and we got it all done this year. Rate of return on infrastructure is about 5% a year. So you're going to get $30 billion in additional GDP. Effective tax rate's about 20%. So you get $6 billion a year in additional revenue. So you're looking at $60 billion over the next 10 years in additional revenue that comes from growth on a 5% return. That's good, that's nice, but that doesn't make it pay for itself. So I think the notion that somehow we can spend a lot of money and it won't cost us much in the end is really misleading. You do this if you think it's worth it, and you're going to have to pay for it somehow.
Well, talking about paying for it, just before we came to air, actually, there was an announcement of the OECD saying that they now 130 nations agreeing to this minimum tax. It has to go forward, probably be the fall before they adopt it, and then 2023 before it takes effect. But does that create the possibility of paying for some of it? First, because more money coming into the Treasury, but also free up a little bit some increased corporate tax in the United States because it takes away some of the argument it'll make us less competitive.
Well, certainly it will do that. The whole point of this is to allow the U.S. to raise its rate from 21% to something north. They proposed 28 initially. I think that was way out of line, would have caused a real problem. If they get this minimum tax, that it's less of a problem. I think the most important thing about the announcement, David, is not the minimum tax per se. As I read the Bloomberg story on this, it also said they had come up with rules for allocating additional taxes on large companies. You recall the Europeans wanted to have a digital services tax, and the U.S. really objected to the notion that just our tech giants should pay that bill. They broadened that to large firms of all types, and it's essentially a sales tax, so it's a new kind of tax to share internationally. If they really have rules of the road for sharing that sales tax, that's a big accomplishment. I still think that's going to be harder than people think to get over the finish line, but this is progress.
But one thing it may take off the table is a trade war over the digital tax, because the United States was threatening to go to war, for example, with France over that.
Absolutely. We had lined up the tariffs that we were going to impose on both that front and others. We've seen both the Europeans and the Biden administration agree to stand down for a finite period of time. The Airbus-Boeing war has been going on for 2 decades, and we've got to stand down in that. All of that, I think, is good news from the trade front, where the escalation of tariffs and retaliation had really become an impediment to the global supply chains and the recovery of the economy.
Okay, Doug, thank you so much for being with us. Always a pleasure. That's Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's American Action Forum president.